Welcome to the 2020 Pima County Sheriff Candidates Online Forum hosted by Sun City Oro Valley Government Affairs Committee. We are recording this forum so that you and those who are unable to join us will be able to view the forum later via YouTube. I am Al Johnson, the moderator of this forum. At the end of this video, we'll be posting information about voter registration and voting for this election, with links to more information about each candidate. Our committee has allotted roughly 60 minutes for this forum, and our timekeeper, Earl, will be helping us stay on track with gentle reminders. Each candidate will be provided with 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. The committee has crafted questions for the candidates and solicited questions for this forum from our residents. Due to time and staffing constraints, our audience will be unable to ask questions during this webinar. Both candidates will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and I'll alternate who will get to answer first. So at this point, I would like to introduce our candidates and allow them to make their opening statement. First, the Democratic candidate for sheriff, Chris Nanos.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Mr. Johnson. My name is Chris Nanos, and I'm running for the office of Sheriff of Pima County. In light of what is happening in our nation today, I don't think I need to tell anyone just how important this election is. The office of Sheriff is complex and requires not just the working knowledge of a street cop, but the knowledge of that is only gained through experience. It requires someone who knows and understands the working of a jail and understands the county budget and understands how those things operate and impact the department. Someone who knows and understands not only that they need to be involved with the community, but also actively engage with the community, its institutions, and its leaders. I have over 41 years of law enforcement experience, where I started at the ground level as a corrections officer and worked my way through the ranks all the way to the top as your sheriff. During my tenure, I worked as a street cop for over 10 years and served as a detective working in homicide and sex crimes, child abuse, narcotics, even internal affairs. I also accrued, though, more importantly, 20 years in executive command positions. As your sheriff, I work closely with various neighborhood groups, our schools, our churches, and our nonprofits. I spent a great deal of time working with other law enforcement leaders, state legislators, and community leaders to get things done. With my years of experience and knowledge of Pima County, I am committed to providing not just the most professional, but the most compassionate law enforcement possible. I believe in justice with sensitivity to social ills that often need a remedy that policing just doesn't provide. It cannot provide. I'll work with community partners to address crime seriously, but also to share resources so that experts can help those who are in need. I believe in the people of this department. I think they deserve the respect and support from the sheriff, and I am committed to providing just that. Thank you so much.
And now the spotlight turns to the Republican candidate for Pima County Sheriff, Sheriff Mark Napier.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this event. Over the past 4 years, I've been proud to serve you as your sheriff. We've made amazing strides at the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Crime is down, staffing is stable and consistent with other agencies of our size. We have engaged in meaningful law enforcement reform. Our ACT reform plan is getting national level attention. Our detention center has recently achieved the highest level of national accreditation. We are more engaged with the community and all segments of the community than we ever have been before. We are finally holding ourselves accountable for real fiscal management with budget surpluses over the last 3 fiscal years. We've obtained grant funding to hire 10 additional deputies to staff a new rural district that will better serve traditionally underserved areas of the county. We've launched innovative programs such as our therapy dog program, which is in our detention center and also part of our SRO program. We have effectively addressed the COVID-19 pandemic, developing a strategic approach that has kept both our staff and our inmates safe. We have had no inmate-to-inmate transmission of COVID-19 inside our facility. By any objective and honest measure, there's a lot going right at the Pima County Sheriff's Department. I've been in law enforcement since 1981. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree in social psychology and a master's degree in criminal justice. I have the experience and the education necessary to effectively and professionally lead our department. There's more work to be done, and I would be honored to serve you for an additional 4 years as your sheriff. Thank you.
Mr. Nanos, the first question is to you. What impact would passage of Proposition 207, the legalization of marijuana, have on the Pima County Sheriff's Department?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it has any impact on the department in terms of what it does in providing law enforcement services. The law is the law. If the bill passes or the proposition passes and becomes law, the department will enact and enforce the law as written. It's just that simple. In my era as a young police officer, we fought the war on drugs. That war should have ended a long time ago. In my opinion, we should be fighting a war on poverty and work to deal with those people who suffer from drug addiction and drug abuse. My personal opinions about marijuana and its usage really don't play here. It's really up to the voters and the citizens, as it should be.
Mr. Napier, the question to you is, what impact would the Proposition 207 have on the Sheriff's Department?
Well, I think that inevitably the recreational use of marijuana will be legislated and probably will become legal across the United States. We currently see that as a trend. It's unmistakable. The problem with marijuana as a drug is we don't know a presumptive level of impairment with marijuana, unlike alcohol, which we've accepted has a 0.08 presumptive level of impairment. So as a drug, marijuana is fundamentally different. Marijuana is also a fat-soluble drug, which means it excretes from your fat glands in your body, and it can dissipate for up to 30 days. So you could test positive for marijuana at a drug test and be completely asymptomatic. So I think there are some public health and public safety concerns associated with the legalization of marijuana. We've made mistakes in the past. Remember that we go back 50 years ago and cigarette smoking was supposed to be safe and effective and okay. And then not long ago, vaping was supposed to be a safe alternative to smoking. I'm a little concerned that this marijuana is not your grandfather or your dad's marijuana. The THC content is significantly higher. And I fear a little bit of the public safety and public health consequence, but we'll enforce the law as willed by the voters.
Okay, and Mr. Napier, continuing with our next question. What do you consider to be the biggest challenge the Sheriff's Department faces today? And what is your plan for addressing that issue?
I think they're hand in hand. The public's confidence in law enforcement has been shaken, of course, by recent events, more so than it ever has been. And commensurate with that is also a very significant challenge in hiring and recruiting, and also the retention, because the career in law enforcement is not seen as desirable by millennials as it might have been for me as a baby boomer. So I think that the erosion of confidence in the public in law enforcement because of recent events certainly is a significant challenge, and along with that's recruiting. So what we need to do is exactly what we're doing at the Pima County Sheriff's Department, is being more strategic in our approach to recruiting, but also being more responsive to the community's concerns and desire for law enforcement reform. That's why we published our ACT reform plan. It's part of our website. You can go to pimasheriff.org, see the plan, and also see our community accountability page, because we're trying to, through transparency, accountability, and community engagement, restore and enhance public trust in our agency and in law enforcement as a whole. So I think those two challenges are hand in hand.
Mr. Nanos, what do you consider as the biggest challenge that the Sheriff's Department is facing today, and how would you address that issue?
Well, without a doubt, like I said earlier, reform is a big issue. It's an issue facing law enforcement across the nation, and Mark is correct. But I also think for our specific department, there's other issues that are big and challenging and probably need to be dealt with before we can even consider anything else. And that is, due to low morale, the deputies and corrections officers are leaving at an alarming rate, and attrition's at its highest levels in years. These staffing levels impact our response times and our ability to provide services. When I was in office, response times were just under 4 minutes. Today, they're now at 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 minutes for priority 1 calls. That shouldn't be happening. Yes, staffing needs to be adjusted. We need to get the right numbers in there before we can start implementing real programs that can help us move forward in our reform efforts.
Okay, a challenge to you, both of you gentlemen. Mr. Nanos, name 3 of your personal accomplishments as sheriff to support voting for you in this election.
So I have a lot more than 3, but I'll just name 3 of what I believe are the biggest 3. 1, jail initiatives. I put into place some jail initiatives that dealt with an alternative choices for over incarceration, such things as electronic monitors. Those things saved us and can continue to save us millions of dollars. The other things I did, though, that were more important to me and closer to my heart was I brought back our school resource officers program and built in a youth leadership camp. Those programs touch my heart because we now know that if you don't graduate high school, you stand a 7 times greater chance of going to jail. What better crime prevention program can you have than investing in the youth of our community and keeping them from going to jail, getting them the right education, and providing a better life for them and for all of us. So those 2, the third one, I guess, would be with the summer youth camp. I also provided a program not many are aware of where we do free house checks, basically costing us nothing because we used our great group of volunteers to go out. If you're out of town for a week, a day, a month, you could call and they would come in and check on your home and make sure everything was okay and proper. Those are some good programs that not just impacted the safety of our community, but also financially served our community better.
And Mr. Napier, your time to blow your own horn. Name 3 of your personal accomplishments as sheriff to support voting for you in this election.
Well, thank you. I was elected to bring about change, and that's exactly what I'm doing and have done. We brought budget management back to the Sheriff's Department. That's important. The $160 million that we're afforded every year of your tax dollars are not monopoly money. So we pushed budget accountability down to the cost center level and held our commanders strictly accountable for their budgets. This is an important thing. We're operating in a much more business-like fashion than we ever have been in the past. The Pima County Sheriff Department is, in fact, a big business. We employ nearly 1,500 people, have a service area of 9,200 square miles, and have literally millions of dollars of fixed assets. We need to perform in a more business-like fashion, and that's exactly what we're doing. We've implemented a strategic plan with respect to recruiting the general operations of the department. The department has to know where it's going to be in 3 to 5 years. Getting to 5 o'clock every day and not screwing up anything too badly is not a strategic plan, but that's a strategic plan that we had when I took office. Part of that strategic plan also includes things like policy revisions, use of force policy revision, pursuit policy revision. We now have a racial profiling policy where we had none before. There was no racial profiling policy to strictly prohibit racial profiling. And then finally, our ACT reform plan. This is receiving national attention because it's on the cutting edge of law enforcement reform in this country. And I'm really proud of that fact that we're leading the way on.
And continuing with you, Mr. Napier, in what ways can you further increase transparency of the operations of the Sheriff's Department?
That is an excellent question, and that's exactly what we're doing. If you go to pimasheriff.org, you'll see a community accountability page that is prominently displayed on that website. And if you click on that, you can find almost any information that you could imagine about the Sheriff's Department, our use of force policies, the incidents of use of force, our budget, our staffing, our attrition rates, which are not higher than they ever have been. That's simply false. Our population in the jail, all those things are forward-facing, transparent, because we have made a commitment as part of our ACT reform plan, and the T in ACT stands for transparency. So all these things that the community was concerned about and would have to normally file a public records request for are now front and center on our website. And being more engaged with the community also helps with the transparency issue. And right now we're more engaged with more segments of the community than we ever have been.
And Mr. Nanos, it's your turn. How would you increase transparency of the operations of the Sheriff's Department?
Well, when I was there, we actually had a little test run by us and we weren't aware of the test. It was actually run by, I believe, K-Gun 9. They, as a news media outlet, had asked us a specific, pretty trivial information on some sort of policy we had. And they asked every law enforcement agency in the area, Tucson Police, Sarita, Oro Valley, name them, all of them, Marana. And they came back to us and reported afterwards, and we weren't aware that this was going on, but they reported to us afterwards that, Sarita, Marana, they took a couple of days to respond to their FOIA request, their Freedom of Information or Public Records request. TPD took a longer period of time, a few weeks. The Pima County Sheriff's Department took about 2 minutes. They literally got on the phone, called the media, asked them what they wanted and gave it to them. That's transparency. Unlike today, where we now have media requests for public records and we get constantly no comment, it's not in my interest to comment, or days go by of quiet silence. We now have a media report out there from Tucson Sentinel where there were 2 deaths that were unreported to anyone that occurred as far back as December and all the way into May. So that was 2 in custody deaths that Tucson Sentinel had to find out on their own.
And Mr. Nanos, as we move on to the next question, this cry for defunding the police, how should we determine the right level of funding and how should the department funds be best allocated?
Thank you for asking that. First of all, defunding the police to me means something different than what most people are thinking of. It's not so much as defunding the police, it's reallocating resources, funds, and that to those agencies that are better equipped at handling certain things that for whatever reason law enforcement was given to take on. We didn't ask to deal with the mentally ill and those who suffered from substance abuse, but it was our challenge and we had to deal with it. Now today in our jails, we find several of those people in there, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands across this nation who suffer from mental abuse or mental illness and substance abuse. Why would we not want to get those people out to those facilities, medical facilities that are better equipped with real medical professionals? My young men and women, the deputies and COs do a great job, but their training is so limited in that regards. I don't care if you train them every day, they're never going to be the help that they really need. So we should give them those funds and get it out away from law enforcement domain. My opponent wants to provide a program that's a good program, but he wants to maintain it in-house with the Sheriff's Department. That shouldn't occur. It should be away from us. We don't need to be involved in those types of things. That funding can be used elsewhere.
Mr. Napier, how do you respond to the cry for defunding the police? And how should we determine the right level of funding in the department's funds?
Well, I think the call for defunding the police is somewhat nonsensical because when I started in 1981, law enforcement was arguably pretty simple. But we've consistently asked law enforcement to do more and more, not less, more and more. We've had to engage in the issues of homelessness, the deinstitutionalization of mental illness cases, the substance abuse problem, the overdose problem. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that my deputies would be carrying medicine on their persons as they do today to help save lives in opiate overdoses. So we're asking law enforcement to do much more. We don't need to defund law enforcement, but there is some redefinition of what our role should be. And I do believe that when you call 911, you call for service, and that's the number that we've trained people. Well, that comes into my dispatch center. So it makes sense if we're going to expand our resources that they be housed within the Sheriff's Department because we've trained people to call 911 for assistance. So we will be hiring community engagement specialists, people with specific mental health training, education to go out into the community and handle these calls that otherwise would be handled by deputies. And deputies necessarily have a tool in their toolbox, and that's enforcement. Well, that may be the wrong tool. Thank you.
And as a follow-up to that question, and Mr. Napier, it's to you, how would you recommend that there be funding to train to have these specialists available for those critical calls?
Well, we're asking the Board of Supervisors, we will be asking the Board of Supervisors for additional appropriation However, we've been living well within our budget over the last 3 fiscal years. And I believe that if we had to, we could absorb that within our budget and not blow through our budget as we had done under previous administration. So I think we do have the funding there. There's a possibility for some grant funding also. And with respect to training, we can appropriately use RICO funding to provide additional training. We're providing additional leadership training to our executive staff, and we provide ongoing training to our corrections staff. In fact, we're launching a significant corrections training program through inmate welfare monies to better train all of our corrections officers. So I think there's some reallocation that can be done and some creativeness with grant funding, and also asking for some additional appropriation from the board. Thank you.
Mr. Nanos, as sheriff, how would you recommend that there be funding to train these specialists?
Well, first of all, I don't believe you need those specialists. That funding should be provided to those experts out in the community, the health department. It shouldn't be in law enforcement's hands. That's what we've seen across the nation. Go look at Eugene, Oregon. They have a program called Cahoots. It's been in existence for 30 years, 30 plus years. They've handled over 150,000 calls for mental illness and substance abuse. Of those 150,000 calls in 30 years' time, they've called the police 150 times. We don't need funding. In fact, actually, Mark has 2 programs. He wants a program that he's going to find some grant money to put people on the border, 10 officers that have that money should be used for cameras, body cameras. His reform has nothing to do with body cameras, but he explains that it's just too costly a budget to issue with. There's funding out there. There's grant money available for body cameras. We now know that Spokane has 271 officers with body cameras, and they're paying $300,000 a year. Do you know that that's very infinitesimal to the budget of $170 million? The sheriff talks about being budget fiscally responsible, but what he doesn't tell you is his budget went from $145 million when I was there to $170 million today. That's a $25 million increase, the largest increase in a 4-year term for any sheriff. So yeah, there's money there. It's a matter of prioritizing those funds.
And Mr. Nanos, the next question is yours. As sheriff, how would you direct the focus on defusing socially charged situations versus forceful escalation?
So if I understand your question right, you're asking about de-escalation, and that all of what the whole focus here comes back to training. And for me, the important thing to do is this. I did it when I was in office. One of the first things I looked at was who's doing our training, what are we training, and how are we training? We came up with a lesson plan for the entire program of training our officers that was a curriculum that led us to a point where we did away with this warrior mindset and did more towards the guardian mindset. Less than 3% of calls for officers across the nation deal with a situation of force. We need to be training our people how to handle those things. Today, we have 99%, if not 100% of our training staff is our SWAT team. I love our SWAT team. They're very valuable. They're very important. They're critical. When you need them, they're the tip of the spear. But we shouldn't be depending on a warrior to train for 3% of the calls. We need to be involved with the training program and take a hard look at what it is to train and how we train and who trains for you.
Mr. Napier, how would you propose to focus upon defusing socially charged situations versus forceful escalation?
Well, I think I may better understand the nature of the question. With the social unrest in this country, it has been a challenge for law enforcement. How do you address that? Well, I think first and foremost, you need to reach out to the communities that are currently socially charged and develop relationships with them before we get into the streets and we have violence and we have property damage. And then make sure that your approach to these events don't serve to escalate the tensions. We've seen law enforcement officers in very aggressive postures toward what are otherwise peaceful protesters, and then these things escalate. We should be absolutely intolerant of the expression of social unrest and property damage, criminality, violence. That's not part of what is protected by our Constitution. but it's the manner in which we address these things that can either serve to de-escalate these situations or to escalate them. And I think that's the nature of your question. So I think you reach out to these communities, or segments of the community that are socially charged before you have this massive event that gets out of control at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and you have looting and these things going on. And I think the manner in which law enforcement approaches these situations can serve to either charge them up or de-escalate them.
Mr. Napier, we're going to change to a different direction. Do you foresee additional opportunities to improve operational efficiency and contain costs by sharing resources, automation, and tools with other jurisdictions?
Of course, we must always be looking at these things. We have great regional relationships here in Pima County now. I think to some degree better than the 30 plus years that I've been in this valley. All the law enforcement heads get along, and we do share resources. We have task forces where we share human resources and intelligence. We need to better leverage those things. But right now, what I don't see in Pima County that we have had in the past are these walls between departments where we don't really share resources and information and human resources to the degree that we should. There have been several failures in that regard. Our communication center was supposed to be a regional thing, but yet TPD still has theirs. So there's been some failures in this in the past. But I think that we have to look to this cost-saving measures and to looking at efficiencies, kind of like what I brought to the department, is a much more business-like acumen to the operation of the sheriff's department.
And Mr. Nanos, what do you foresee would be additional opportunities to improve operational efficiency and contain costs by sharing resources, automation, and tools with other jurisdictions?
Well, first of all, when I was there, we had, and I believe we still do, a regional SWAT team, regional communication efforts. Because one agency or two agencies aren't a part of it doesn't make it not regional. We supported a lot of the smaller agencies, Oro Valley for one, Sarita, Marana. As the Sheriff's Department, Tucson Police has their own issues and their own problems. And as the Sheriff's Department, we saw that we had some resources and availability to help the smaller agencies. Today, though, it's more of a partnership. Is that partnership equal? I don't know. That's something that should probably be taken a look at. But I will say this. When I was there, we worked closely with all of our agencies, all of the law enforcement heads. We went to lunch together. We spoke together often. I went to speaking engagements with Chief Magnus, and you never, ever said a bad word about another agency head in front of your command team. That's just a no. And those reports have come out of our current sheriff's office now.
Mr. Nanos, both of you are going to get a challenge because there's only one answer you can give. What is the one thing that the Sheriff's Department is doing that it should stop doing, and why? What should the department be doing to address the issue in a different way?
Is this my question, sir?
Mr. Nanos, that is yours.
We should stop bullying and intimidating and dividing our own team for our own political gains. You wanted a short answer, that's it.
Okay, and Mr. Napier, what is the one thing that should stop doing and why?
We should stop doing the internal divisiveness that is promulgated by the prior administration in the hopes of derailing the current administration. It's unfortunate, nonetheless, it's true. What we need to do is come together as a department and realize that change is coming, and change will always be disquieting to some members of the department. And that's fine. It's not always going to be popular, nor should it be. But this divisiveness and this internal strife that is continually promulgated within the department is counterproductive to public safety and the efficient, effective operation of the department.
And now we're just going to take that question and turn it around. Mr. Napier, what is the one thing that the Sheriff's Department is not doing today that it should begin doing? And what would you reduce or stop in order to fund this new initiative?
Well, I think the one thing that we're not doing that we're in process of doing is starting a citizen review panel. That panel will help us review serious use of force issues, serious disciplinary issues. And we've not done that before. It's an offshoot of the Sheriff's Community Advisory Council. And I think they're going to provide valuable input into the way that the Sheriff's Department operates, the way that we look at use of force issues and they'll provide us that from a community perspective, which I don't have the same lens. I have the lens of somebody who's been in law enforcement for almost 4 decades. So having that community input into our policies, into our practice, into our review of use of force and serious disciplinary issues is important. A lot of departments have this, and we currently don't, and didn't when I took office. That won't require any additional appropriation. It just requires a commitment from us to embrace this. And this is significant change, and it's not entirely popular within the department. There's a lot of trepidation about it. So I think that this is something that we can do. We are in process of doing, but it won't require any additional funding.
And Mr. Nanos, I'll repeat the question. What is the one thing that the Sheriff's Department is not doing today that it should begin doing? And what would you reduce or stop in order to fund this new initiative?
Very simple. First thing right out of the chute, body cameras. Our deputies need them. Our COs need them. They are in today's world of policing, they are not just instrumental to keeping our public safe, they also can keep our deputies safe. We now know everybody has a camera in their hand out on the streets. And when you just allow one side of the story to be told because you yourself have not found the funding available for or prioritized it, that's a shame. Our deputies need to be protected just as much as the public. I would insist on body cameras. That way, as a leader of the organization, I'll get to see both sides of the issue. And if our deputies are wrong, that will be clear. If they're right, though, and there's another side, that should be shown. It should be given out there. How do we fund it? It's pretty easy. $300,000 is about the average for body cameras a year annually for an agency our size. That's a smittance of your budget. Get rid of the lawsuits that we've seen, $800,000 in lawsuits for just our deputies and our commanders suing the current command staff. You could save that money by getting rid of your CES program and giving that to the health department. You could save that money by getting grants, cop grants, instead of putting people on the border that's not needed, and use that grant money. There's funds available.
Okay, Earl, let's go with 2 minutes for each of them on the next question. Actually, I'm combining 2 questions. A lot of discussion takes place here in Tucson and Pima County regarding assisting U.S. immigration, customs enforcement, immigration enforcement, and use of Stone Garden, getting money to deal with that issue. So let's give each candidate 2 minutes to respond to the relationship with federal intervention in local enforcement and immigration. And Mr. Nanos, we'll start with you.
So when I became sheriff, I had met twice now with Mr. Kurlikowski, who was the HSI director at the time. He was under President Obama's administration. And both times I told him that his Stone Garden money is not what we need or what we want. It cost us more to have that money than anything else. It was literally, they would give us money and I would end up paying higher costs. It's like, I think Mr. Huckleberry said, 3 to 5 times higher costs than what they were giving us per deputy. It gets a little complicated when you add in the employee-related expenses of pensions and health insurances and all those things, but the costs were there. The other reason, and the more important reason to me, was that issue of doing Border Patrol's work for Border Patrol at their direction, not even our direction, we turned our people to them, was just not right to me. If Border Patrol needs our assistance, just like any agency, whether it be Oro Valley, Marana, TPD, they call, we come, we would provide them assistance, and then we leave. You see, we didn't do their job for them. We assist them and we leave. The same would be with Border Patrol. We'll never not assist another law enforcement agency. If they need our help, we'll be there. But understand, Border Patrol has 150,000 agents, 50 some thousand agents, I believe, 7,000 here in Tucson. They need to deal with the border. That's a federal issue. It's not a county issue. Somewhere along the line, the federal government, because of their failed policies in immigration, dropped that on the local communities to deal with. That's not right. And it takes someone local to stand up and say to the federal government,
Morning.
that's enough. We don't need that's not the help we need.
And Mr. Napier, you have 2 minutes to respond to the position of involvement with federal intervention in local law enforcement and cooperation with U.S. Immigration and Customs.
Well, thank you. The fact of the matter is that my opponent accepted Stone Garden funding, as did the county, for 12 years. This is not a new program. It's not something that I created. It's something that we've been engaged in for more than a decade. It provided overtime funding to deploy deputies in areas where there are transnational crime threats that have a public safety nexus to the people of Pima County. Those things are things like drug trafficking, human trafficking. These are not victimless crimes, and they don't have no nexus to public safety in Pima County. That's why the Board of Supervisors, for well more than a decade before I became sheriff, accepted these funds, often on the consent agenda with no deliberation, no public forum, no discussion about these things. And my opponent readily accepted these funds and deployed resources in exactly the same manner in which I intended to. I have been crystal clear, beyond crystal clear. Our department will never be a 287G department. And that would be the cross certification of deputies as immigration enforcement agents. That is not their job. We can maintain our lane, which is public safety in Pima County, while still cooperating with the federal authorities and participating in Stone Garden, just like we did for a decade before I became sheriff. There are about 4,000 Border Patrol agents in the Tucson sector. I have roughly 400, 500 sworn people. I cannot adopt their responsibility, nor should I. We don't have the authority to engage in federal immigration enforcement, and that is not our job. Public safety in Pima County is our job. Drug trafficking and human trafficking is a public safety threat to the people of Pima County that I have affirmative responsibility to address, and Stone Garden funding simply helped us better do that.
Our next question, and Mr. Napier, we'll start with you. It's a very targeted type question. What is your position on the use of no-knock warrants?
They are prohibited by our new use of force policy. As part of our act reform plan, we have prohibited them unless the sheriff herself authorizes a no-knock warrant, which would have to be under extraordinary circumstances. Commensurate with the current release from the Department of Justice, they just released their guidelines on use of force policies and community reform. And one of the edicts within that policy, which I just read yesterday, is the abolishment of no-knock warrants unless in extreme circumstances. And the fact of the matter is the Pima County Sheriff's Department has not been using no-knock warrants for some time. So this is something that's currently prohibited, would have to be approved by me directly. And I can't imagine a circumstance under which we would do that. I suppose in an extreme circumstance, there might be a prevailing safety need for a no-knock warrant, but otherwise they're prohibited.
And Mr. Nanos, as sheriff, what would be your position on the use of no-knock warrants?
Well, I'll be quick with this. None, ever. They're not necessary. You're putting not just the people, the public in harm, you're putting your officers in danger. They're not necessary. We learned that from the Garena case. When you go to a home that you believe is a danger or you need to serve a warrant, you can stand outside, you can protect yourself, and you can call them up and make them come out. If they don't come out, then we negotiate with them till the cows come home. We do not force our way in. I've got all kinds of time on my hands. We'll pay the overtime, but I had a policy with my SWAT team and my hostage negotiators that enough's enough. We're not just going to go charge in anymore. We will stay back and negotiate until he gives up. If it takes us days, trust me, we've done this before. We can do it again. We don't need no-knock warrants in Pima County, ever.
We're down to our last question, gentlemen. And Mr. Nanos, are body cameras a good idea for the Sheriff's Department? Why? And how would you implement them?
Well, I'll repeat it. Absolutely. They are, they're not just, you know, the deputies want them now. They recognize the need to probably 10, 15 years ago, when I was in internal affairs, we were getting a number of calls from people in traffic stops, and they'd say our deputy said this or did that. And what we did was, and the deputy, of course, would say, no, that didn't occur. What we did was we provided our deputies with tape recorders, audio recorders. And every time they found themselves in a situation of a traffic stop, we just said, turn on your recorder. And that eliminated so many complaints. A body camera is no different. The cost is a very poor excuse to say in today's world of police equipment, that should be a number one priority. There's just, it's across the nation. Every large agency our size, if they don't have it, they're pursuing them. We need to pursue it. And we need to do that first, day one. That will be day one.
Mr. Napier, are body cameras a good idea for the department? Why? And if yes, how soon would it be implemented?
Body cameras are inevitable. There's no question about that. I don't know where we come up with a $300,000 figure to implement body cameras, because that's nonsensical. It's considerably more than that. And it doesn't just involve us. It's not just the purchase of the cameras, it's also the storing of the data, the redaction of the data, the public information request, and would require additional staffing at the county attorney's office also. I find suspect that body cameras existed when my opponent was sheriff, and he made no such movement to implement body cameras at that time. They're not new technology, they existed previously. I'm not opposed to body cameras. The simple point is we're midway through our budget year, and whoever the next sheriff is will take care over in January. There is no money in the budget for body cameras, nor has the county attorney had additional funding in their budget to implement body camera program. It will require additional staffing there. Body cameras are inevitable. The technology is improving all the time. I'm not reticent to have a body camera program, but I would need additional staff and additional funding to be able to do that. But make this clear, body cameras are inevitable. They're coming. It will be as much a part of a law enforcement in the coming years as a ballpoint pen and a flashlight. There is no question about that.
Okay, gentlemen, now it's your opportunity to make your final points, your closing arguments for each of you. So first up, Sheriff Mark Napier.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the forum this evening. I've tried to spend all my time telling you why to vote for me and why I think things are going well at the Sheriff's Department currently. We need to keep the Sheriff's Department moving in the right direction. Change and holding people accountable is not always going to be popular, but it is in fact what the community expects from us. I am the elected Vice President of Arizona Sheriff's Association and also Major County Sheriffs of America. I have been recognized by my peers as one of the nationally recognized leading sheriffs in this country. I'm endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, the Tucson Police Officers Association, Barbara Lawal, our Democrat county attorney, the Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce, and all Southern Arizona sheriffs. The majority of my commanders and supervisors signed their names to a letter of support regarding my leadership. I've spoken about many facts and figures this evening. Those are available on our website, pimasheriff.org, on our new accountability page. You should go see those for yourself. They verify that the facts and things that I've been speaking about today are factual. Proud to be leading the way on national level law enforcement reform at our Sheriff's Department. We've been recognized in 2 national televised WebEx presentations and will soon be recognized in the national leading law enforcement magazine for our reform efforts. I've tried to bring a sensible and reasonable and responsible voice to border security issues and am sought out as a national expert on those issues. We do not need to return to the past. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate. I'm asking for your support for re-election. Let's ensure that we keep our department moving forward with experienced, educated, professional, and effective leadership that the department and the community deserves. Thank you for the opportunity to be present this evening. Thank you.
And Mr. Chris Nanos, it is now your turn. You have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. First of all, I just want to mention being endorsed by another agency and not your own agency says a lot. Having signatures obtained by bosses walking around and saying, here, I'm a good boss, sign this, also says a lot. That's the division and the morale breaking that goes on at that, and in term intimidation and bullying that goes on today. There's no need for that. These young men and women want to be police officers. They want to do their jobs and that's it. They don't need to be involved in the politics here today. I will say, in today's world of policing, given a great opportunity to make real change and real form, I have those plans. I will have body cameras. I will find ways to fund them. I will look at alternatives for overcrowded jails and the high rate of incarceration. I'll go back to using ankle monitors that cost us $15 a day, not $127 a day. Where at that rate, you eliminate 10% of that jail, you're still saving literally tens of millions of dollars a year. Let me be real clear here, though. If you hurt someone or threaten to hurt someone, then jail is the place for you. There's no doubt about it. But if you're sick, if you're afflicted, if you suffer from mental illness or drug addiction, then you belong in a hospital, not a locked jail cell. My reform will work with community leaders in the social service arena to give those law enforcement duties that deal with those who suffer from addiction and mental illness back to the experts, not keep them in the domain under a law enforcement agency so that they can train experts themselves that will never attain that level of training needed. I will work with community boards to oversee critical incidents such as use of force and officer-involved shootings and custody deaths. And my reform won't just use technology. My reform will be out of compassion and need, and what is best for our community. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I never will, but I know I can listen, and I will be here for you, not in Washington.
We'd like to thank you, Sheriff Mark Napier and Mr. Chris Nanos, for taking the time today to help us understand your positions on key issues for Pima County and the Sheriff's Office. We encourage everyone to vote in the November election. If you intend to vote by early ballot, please make sure that you are on Pima County's permanent early voting list. This is especially important if you will be out of town in early November. So once again, gentlemen, thank you for coming to Sun City.